Alrighty, thanks for joining everyone. We're going to get started here. Thanks for joining our webinar, the Why Communicators Should Care About the Digital Workplace. We're your hosts and your presenters today. My name is Brian, and I'm the Director of Products and Services here at Habanero.
And hi, I'm Mallory O'Connor. I'm the Practice Lead for Enterprise Experiences and Innovation.
Great, and welcome. I guess maybe before I start too, a little housekeeping. We do have questions turned on in the GoToWebinar software. So if you do have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to ask them and we will try to answer them at the end. The presentation is a little less than an hour long, but about an hour long. And yeah, we will be recording it today. So if you missed some of it, we'll make sure that we send that out in our next newsletter. If you aren't getting our newsletter yet, you can sign up for that on habaneroconsulting.com at the bottom. It's a place for you to get all that nice news from us, and we'll let you know when we have it recorded. So let's just get started, and I'll start with a little bit about Habanero. You know, bringing life to work is a bit of a tagline of ours. It really speaks to the passion we have around helping organizations become better places to work. And we believe there's so much potential in this society that can be unlocked by helping build exceptional careers and helping organizations perform at higher levels. And that's a large part of what today's presentation is about, actually. It's certainly what inspires us to come to work every day. We've been ranked as one of Canada's top workplaces by the Globe and Mail, and for at least 6 years, actually, for 6 years. And we've placed #1 twice. We have a relentless focus on creating high-performing, engaged teams, both inside our organizations and yours. And we get immense pride for being on this list, but you know, we're more proud even to see our clients there and help organizations along their journey to be better workplaces. We work with clients across North America, but we do that from our offices in Vancouver, Calgary, Winnipeg, and Toronto. So we're all across the Canadian landscape. And today, we're going to share with you a few stories from all different types of clients, you know, transportation, retail, and government and healthcare. And, you know, all these stories have to do with communicators and communicators who at some level are driving their digital workplace agenda, but they don't start off driving as digital workplace initiatives. In fact, most of our clients wouldn't have said that was their goal at all. They actually all start with helping their organization rally behind a shared identity, the shared sense of purpose and values. And eventually, the digital workplace would support that rollout and support connecting people to that purpose and values. And they also aim to make people make better decisions in the jobs that they perform. So there's something about really helping individuals be more successful at work. You know, to frame how we're going to present today, I think the best way to say that is by talking through some of our beliefs. And before we get into the client stories, we'll kind of share with you our thoughts on, first, that we believe the world of work is changing. There's some dramatic shifts in how we get work done and how we relate to the human beings that are in it. So we'll talk a little bit about the changing world of work. The second, we believe as a response to this, the future organization will be a lot more empathetic, way more agile, and way more human-centered. And so this is a center for the very common theme in today's presentation. We also believe that having that empathy and being more agile and human-oriented will also dictate and create future technology experiences for people in the organizations, or what we call the digital workplace. And communicators, we believe, will be at the forefront of this change based on where they are. And you might be thinking, so why communicators? Why do we need to own the digital workplace as communicators? And I used to work in a communications department for 25 years ago, quite a long time ago, and I've seen dramatic shifts in it. And one of the best ways I might describe one of those shifts is by looking at the empathy map of a communicator. So if you haven't seen an empathy map before, it's a really great tool to get a perspective of what it's like to walk in someone else's shoes. And when you draw it, you draw a head, essentially. And for me, I think of the eyes as seeing, the mouth as saying, the ears is hearing, and the top of the head is thinking and feeling. And it's a way to track kind of what's going on in people's worlds related to a subject. So if we look at the world of the communicator, what we see and what they see is that their role is expanding within their organization. They're hearing from executive teams that they need to own part of the transformation agenda. More and more, we're seeing communicators say they're being part of a change program, a large, could be digital transformation, or maybe it's not labeled as such, but a big change program. And to get this done, they're wanting to foster more dialogue, more conversation within the organization, knowing that engaging with employees is one of the best ways they're going to roll out that change. But they're saying that getting the message out is more and more difficult. In fact, we hear the quote, I need to get the right information, the right person at the right time, but that's getting harder and harder. And what they're thinking is that there's so many tools out there, so many channels, so many places that people are visiting, that it's getting more and more difficult. And to combine with that, they're really striving to gather more evidence that that their world is working, and that the communications that they're putting out or that they're facilitating in the organization are having an impact in the organization. So let's talk about what's forcing this dynamic of transformation and this kind of change that communicators are experiencing. And we'll start with this idea of thinking of the workplace no longer as a physical place where people do their work, but something different. Before I go into that, I'd just like to talk about a little crisis we're having in the workplace, though. I think it's super relevant for this conversation, and it's about our engagement in our jobs. And if you are not familiar with Gallup, they're one of the world's largest research organizations, and they use techniques like polling to gather insight about various topics. And one of the topics they've been following since 2000 is how engaged we are in our work lives. And on their homepage, you'll see this right next to the daily Trump approval poll. They track the engagement poll. And right now, they're estimating, based on their polling, that our engagement at work is at 33.8%. And so engagement for them means people are involved in, they're enthusiastic about, or they're committed to their work and their workplace. So another way that you might think about that is that 64% of the population is kind of actively disengaged with their workplace, or they're not committed to their work. And Gartner estimates that there's billions in annual lost revenue and productivity because this number is so low. So this is huge opportunity in front of us to change this. And one of the reasons this might be occurring is because of how we run our organizations. So, invented in the 1800s, the late 1800s, and mastered by the 1950s were these very common ways that we see organizations run. And one is the management structure, the very common hierarchical structures that we get work done in. Two is our learning and development models and how we expect and want people to have very specific learning paths in companies. Three is this idea of performance management and how we actually maintain performance in individuals. If you think of what was occurring in the 1950s, this world of a lot of manual labor, this world of a lot of repeat tasks, performance was really around comparing ourselves to peers. And high performance was how well you performed against everyone that was doing a very similar job as you. But certainly we know that's changed cognitively. And then paper performance, this one hasn't certainly disappeared. It's super common in the world, but this idea that we bonus or pay people based on how well they perform against that, these are all the structures that are shifting and changing, but slowly, and perhaps that's why people are mostly disengaged at work these days. The environment was a lot different back then too. We had much more static office environments. If you were mobile, it probably meant you were a traveling salesman. Certainly we know that the workplace environment is much different now. 75% of the workforce in the 1950s was in some form of a routine job, and almost half of that was actually in a physical routine job, so manual labor in a production mode. But we have more and more insight that these techniques aren't working for us. One of them, this is the first time I've ever quoted Wikipedia in a presentation, is that academic evidence has increasingly mounted indicating that performance-related pay leads to the opposite of the desired outcomes when it's applied to any work involving cognitive rather than physical skill. So imagine, all of your sales team or anyone in the organization that you're paying to boost performance, that the research actually shows not that it's helping, but it's actually driving the opposite outcome. So Daniel Pink in his book Drive, a great book if you haven't read it, he showcases this research in his book. And then he furthers the research by defining, well, what really does motivate individuals? And what he came up with is this idea of motivation being driven by these principles of autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Autonomy that we are given in the jobs and the tasks that we have, our ability to become masters in it, so not stop short of doing great work. And now we are driven by a sense of purpose and given a sense of purpose. So some of the other external indicators that this is really changing. This was some research built by a company called Third Way. They were doing, if you think of the median as 50, they've looked at how work functions or working styles have changed since the 1960s. And this chart is showcasing a change of the types of jobs that are in the market. The top two lines show this increase in what they call solving problems or unstructured jobs, where you're working with new information regularly. And the bottom two lines indicate a decrease in routine and cognitive and manual tasks in the world. And what I find really interesting actually is the orange line is the routine manual tasks, things like we've seen replace, let's say, car manufacturing and the robots that now do that kind of work. The green line, however, is the routine cognitive tasks. So these are the kind of jobs that have been replaced by like bank machines, bank teller jobs, which have been replaced by bank machines. So this one line here, back in 2009, I'll bet you, if you've been following the news lately, that this is just going to be continuing to decrease over the next few years. It's one of the ones most impacted by this idea of artificial intelligence and what's happening in the world of AI. Just to make that relevant for communicators, Gartner actually predicts that by 2018, 20% of all business content will be authored by machines. Now, they made this prediction in 2015, so they only have one more year to be right, but that wasn't long ago to make this kind of bold statement. And certainly we're seeing that in the world at large. Millions of articles, for example, in the news world are manufactured by a robot, many without even a human editorial process involved in it. And I think that'll just continue. Another major change is this idea of the amount of information we're dealing with as people, as human beings. Since 2015, 2.5 quintillion bytes of data are created every day. I think it's interesting to compare this to the 1964 edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica, which at the time was still updated annually. And this is a picture where they're madly updating the volumes the day that Kennedy was shot, because they were just about to go to press. And in response to this, if you haven't felt it in your organization, you certainly can look around and see that in lots of the organizations in the world, we're starting to see new org structures emerge. And terms like adhocracy and holacracy, or these terms like hierarchy, which refers to these ad hoc networks that we create inside of organizations. So there's, even in the org structure, we're seeing that sort of dissipate into new kinds of working models. One of the things that ties these changes to the digital workplace, I think, is this engagement hierarchy from Gallup. And so Gallup not only does research around what the current engagement at work is polling at, they look at, well, what creates engaged employees? And they have this map of 12 elements, and here I've represented only 5 of them, that all go along what they call their engagement hierarchy. And you can kind of think of it like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So those basic needs, they call the base camp needs, and the ones at the top are kind of the more sort of nirvana aspirational ideas. And as a communicator, we're often in that world of driving the mission and purpose of the company, or helping make sure people's opinions matter by creating dialogue. So we're at the top of this pyramid, but at the bottom of it is that basic needs. I have the tools I need for my job. And according to Gartner, if we don't get past basic needs, so if employees are existing in their organizations, wanting more tools or needing tools and feeling disabled around their technology or their landscape, they actually won't move up this hierarchy and appreciate these other elements of engagement. So speaking of a digital workplace, it's a term that's passed around a lot these days, and I thought I'd just kind of give you my perspective on what are some of the key elements that are involved in this, quote, digital workplace. The one big concept is that it's an around to allow employees to better connect with customers, their partners, or their other employees. So as a response to these flat hierarchies, as a response to our inability to have the right kind of engagement at work, we're trying to make people feel more connected in the world through their digital landscape. It's very common that it develops from an empathetic inquiry into their motivation. So on the backs of things like Daniel Pink's research, it's about trying to understand the autonomy and mastery and purpose within those people's worlds and driving technology to support those. One really interesting one for me, and this certainly speaks to the spirit of Habanero and how we implement, but when you have a passionate practitioner in the digital workplace, there's this almost altruistic idea that we're trying to make people's lives better at work, and that in turn, that will make organizations perform better, but performance isn't the number one reason people go to a digital workplace. And then finally, it is often more about business strategy than technology. So it's not about implementing a tools per se, but it's about embedding this into the whole entire organization and its strategy. So if a digital workplace develops from this profound understanding of empathy and employee and their engagement in the organization, workplaces need to see this as more as part of the business strategy. And I think that's why communicators need to care about it more. And it's not just a disparate, isolated series of technologies and tools. So this concept or this idea is packed up in this term that is emerging in the market, which is called design thinking. And I'm going to pass it to Mallory to provide an overview of what that is.
Great, thanks, Brian. So Brian sort of shared a little bit of his perspective and Habanero's perspective on the digital workplace and what that's made up of. And I wanted to share why we feel that sort of design thinking is the perfect sort of tool set or techniques that your organization can use to respond to sort of this agile and empathetic and human-oriented foundation of the digital workplace. And because, no presentation is complete without a Steve Jobs quote, I thought this would be interesting to share, but mostly because what it does is it makes the case for what design thinking is and its power to create experiences. And our orientation around design thinking is all about this. It's less about what things look like and the package that they come in, and it's really about an understanding for the process of how things work, and more importantly, how things feel when you interact with them. We know from Apple's history that this has really helped them create some incredible experiences with their products, and we could use some of this thinking to apply to our workplaces. So what is design thinking? It's a pretty catchy phrase these days. We hear a lot about it, but it's really hard for most people to define. And I think I'd argue that it's really because it's not just one thing. Design thinking is a bit of a way of looking at uncovering challenges and solving problems. So the first principle is really that it's human-centered, and I think it's the most relevant in the context of the modern workplace, because design thinking ultimately puts people at the center of the process rather than starting with the solution or the technology or the processes first. Secondly, it involves taking a holistic approach, and that's one of the biggest differentiators of design thinking from other types of problem solving. It's really sort of the altitude at which you begin to view the problem, and design thinking allows you to step back and sort of see the connections of people and tools and channels, and it allows you to think about whether you're solving the right problem or what's the first problem to solve. The third principle is really about collaboration, and it's about designing, if you can just spin it, to design with people instead of for them. And because you're doing this and you have this perspective, it creates an accountability for people who are involved in the process and an ownership and a desire to see things through the organization. It's less about a big reveal about the big solution and more about co-creating and finding our way together. It's also visual. As we've all probably read really awful sort of long Word documents and reports, there's challenges in using language to communicate complex ideas and complex problems to an audience consistently. So our thinking around sort of using these techniques is be visual to go against your grain, and instead of using a big report, tell a story and really focus on things like pictures and models and quotes and real people so that you can tell something that's memorable, that stands on its own and can be retold, but more importantly, that creates power in sharing and understanding across a group of people around that challenge. And finally, it's about prototyping and piloting. It's about experimentation where you have permission to try something, fail at it, and learn from your mistakes, because you can come up with new ideas at different levels of fidelity and get feedback from them before moving forward. So those, I think, together create what design thinking really is. So, and it's, as I say, a powerful approach for informing the design of experience. And if you use these tools, I think, and techniques from the toolkit, your organization can develop a more holistic and complete approach to the complexities that you're going to face with the digital workplace. But it isn't something new. I think that's a bit of a fallacy. It's actually based on an approach that's been taught in design schools for decades. But what is new is how it's being used in business. So it's been recognized lately for its capability to solve complex problems. So much so that non-design based organizations are looking to quickly build their expertise in design thinking in-house. We've seen companies like Accenture, PwC, acquiring digital design agencies and using them to expand their ability to solve problems around the digital workplace in a new way. So examples you might have heard of are the acquisition of Lunar by McKinsey to allow them to bridge strategy together with digital experience and design. Another really cool example is the financial institution Capital One purchasing one of the founding San Francisco firms for user experience design called Adaptive Path, and bringing that entire team in-house into Capital One to solve their own challenges. So we're also seeing enterprise and crown corporation teams that we work with inside organizations looking to build their skills and to try and solve problems with this mindset. And so we're helping them do that through the projects that we're engaged in and coaching their teams to build their skills.
So thanks, Mallory. Now that we have a design, this baseline for design thinking in the digital workplace, we thought we'd share some stories. And what's really interesting about these stories, I think, is, as I mentioned before, they didn't start with the, we need to build a better digital workplace. They all started with this idea that they wanted to improve their culture and alignment to their purpose as organizations. And eventually the tools would be supportive in that journey. So Mallory, I'm going to let you start off with the first story around WestJet.
Mm-hmm. So we wanted to share this story because it really does demonstrate how WestJet used design thinking to embark on this very first step in a journey towards their organization's refreshed vision and values and their communications with their employees. And we've been chatting with WestJet during last year about some of the challenges that are probably pretty common across organizations: engagement, corporate performance, culture. And so their CEO, Greg Soretsky, and the communications team were challenged to reconnect WestJetters with their organizational values and communicate the vision for the company over the next 20 years as they celebrated their 20th anniversary. And so in a series of cross-country events for all of their employees, they called it Ignite 20, they brought WestJetters together and set the stage for the vision that they had ahead. And coming out of Ignite, the team was tasked with tackling their first steps in this new digital workplace and their employee experience and communications. And so what they were really trying to do in a new way was to communicate effectively with this vast number of deskless employees, people who don't sit at computers every day. There are 9,000 employees of 12. They wanted to be really transparent about the dialogue that they were having around their new vision and be able to have a two-way communication. They wanted to also show that they were doing things differently and making an impact back into the organization, but also starting with something small enough that they could actually get it done fairly quickly. And lastly, from a technology perspective, they really wanted to make sure that whatever they did address some of their communications challenges was, how do we make sure that it marries in with our future vision for technology in the digital workplace? So given all of these variables, and we felt they were a really awesome candidate for design thinking and to discover what to do, how to do it, and then really quickly make that progress. So we used a human-centered agile process to narrow the problem space. Rather than doing 2 months or whatever of discovery, we took a much more agile approach where we took 2 of our experienced designers and embedded them on site at WestJet for 5 days in a design sprint. And so during that time, we worked really collaboratively with our stakeholders in communications and IT, as well as partners in the business. And we interviewed WestJetters, we gathered analytics, we looked at all the existing systems, and literally, and you can see from this image, we started by putting people at the center of the experience and use that as an example to create empathy and understand our target audience. We wanted to understand the things that employees might need to do to get their job done, to feel informed and in the loop, and what they're doing actually to feel that they're being heard and that what they're sharing back in the organization. We also really needed to hammer out what were the pains around these sort of communications, and therefore what are the opportunities for us for WestJet in their next stage. So by the end of the second day, we started to shape a vision that was based on sort of empathy and the communication priorities. We were using the persona of the flight attendant and started mapping out the touch points of their experience today and what principles we could shape into the future. So quickly we decided on scope, which was to create something small, like we talked about it as a skateboard, not a car or not even a scooter. We really wanted to narrow in on that priority scenario of the flight attendant because they were the least connected and we could have the most impact with them. And we wanted to really ensure that we were powering the mobile experience as much as possible because this is that deskless scenario. And finally, we wanted to focus on sort of engaging and rich content and timely and targeted communications that encourage discussion. So on the third day, we moved into rapid concepting and prototypes. So we started working with paper. This is this low fidelity prototype experience where we were prioritizing features quite quickly, identifying the kind of communications we needed to get in front of people, and explored how that two-way conversation would work with their enterprise social network with Yammer. We also brought people in throughout these days for continuous validation and quickly redirect where we needed to. On the next day, we took these concepts and refined them. And so you can see we're starting to pull together a higher fidelity form factor. We're sort of simulating scrolling through a cardboard phone so that we could get a feel for what it was like to use a portal to share these communications and respond. We also looked at prioritization together with our stakeholders to figure out how big this effort would be and what we should do first in order to implement it. And so on the fourth day, we actually did we had a higher fidelity prototype where we embellished the phone experience to sort of a foam core that we could put in someone's hand, and then we tested it with employees. What's amazing about WestJet is they have what's called their Change Champion community. And so this is a program where employees opt in for feedback and early access to testing ideas. And so we were able to really quickly put this in front of them, put it in their hands, and get feedback within a day. And based on that, we were able to reprioritize ideas, cut and paste literally because it's paper, and move forward with our concepts. So following that initial week, we worked with WestJet to shape an implementation plan for the communications portal. We leveraged our SharePoint-based portal accelerator called Go, which really helped us to rapidly design, build, and deploy an experience in a short time frame that wouldn't have otherwise been possible. So if you can recall, there was that empathy map where we talked about what was important to the flight attendant. It really was engaging in rich content through imagery and videos, encouraging conversation through social, having timely information as well as easy authoring for WestJet communication staff, and having relevant information and accessible from any device. So this is a solution that we built for them on their Office 365 platform using SharePoint Online, and where eventually they will transition the rest of their current on-prem portal to this experience when they're ready. So as you can see, we've got different categories of news and information that you can scroll through. The communicators can pin different news items so that they don't get lost in the scroll and the feed. They're all searchable, and you can see the exposure of the embedded social inside the posts. Because WestJet employees are also owners, it was really important for them to have a sense of the financial performance of the company. So we use stock information to be able to share that right here in this channel. And if you've been on a WestJet flight, you know that they tell jokes. So we've got the joke of the week that people can read and submit and connect with people from across the organization. And finally, I wanted to share also with you that while we prioritize mobile, of course, there is a desktop experience that works with this as well, as it's a fully responsive portal. I wanted to talk a little bit about the content experience as well. This is an article page. It was really important for the communicators and our team at WestJet to have rich, engaging layouts, but also to have a really easy authoring experience. We provided tons of flexibility for them to create these pages with and without different components. But one last thing is really important to remember about these pages is that two-way dialogue and transparent and timely conversation for issues that matter. And so that's one of the really exciting parts about this solution as well. They've got integrated social because they've chosen Yammer as part of their collaboration strategy. The mandate was to strategically keep conversations in Yammer and not create them in SharePoint. So what we wanted to be able to do was integrate the two. So we came up with an approach where when an article page is created, a resulting Yammer thread is also created and connected, and the conversation seamlessly happens between the two when users click on join the conversation. So it's this is, I think, a project that's a great example of a high impact solution, getting it in the hands of WestJetters in a short period of time. In fact, it just went live this week, which is why we have lorem ipsum in these. We can't share live screenshots with you because it just went live yesterday. But it's a really great example for using a small and agile approach to build the foundation for a digital workplace that'll continue to grow.
Great, thanks, Mallory. So I'll get to share a little bit about the story about Arc'teryx, and maybe the punchline to this story is that while they're currently implementing Yammer and some digital tools, this story certainly doesn't start with an idea of what you would consider a digital workplace agenda. So Arc'teryx is a high-performing outdoor equipment company. They're known for creating this beautiful clothing and gear for climbing, skiing, and alpine technologies, but they also appeal to people like myself. I think they make gorgeous product. It's good to know a little bit about them. One of the things that's really transparent when you're in their offices is they just have a culture of constant improvement, and it stands out anywhere you are at an organization. And I'm not sure if that's driven from this quality of their product and the product design, and that shows up as an organizational practice, or that they're driven from a sports culture with the gear that they create. Maybe it comes from that. But what's great about that culture is it allows them to look at things ahead of problems and ahead of failures. And they had this multidisciplinary values and culture team that first approached Habanero just because they knew we were a great workplace. And they were curious about that recognition, and were, as a constant improvement, I would say, agenda, wanted to get as much information about that as possible. And where we found there was a great connection between our beliefs as an organization, and ended up helping them with an agenda or an opportunity to help refine their values and purpose within their organization. Because they felt if they could build an authentic articulation of their values and purpose, that it's something that people could really get behind. And those hallway conversations and the autonomous decisions that we make every day would be improved within the organization. So let's talk a little bit about the project. I'm kind of going to go into a bit of the techniques we used within the project. One of the neat ways we started this project was with a success letter with a values and culture team. So this is a neat tool to use when you're not sure if everyone's on the same page and you're trying to get everyone's unique perspectives really early on. And it starts with having people write a letter as though they're a person congratulating you about some success that you've made as a team. And so they had to put themselves in the shoes of employees within the organization and talk about, what would they write to you about this? What would they thank you for? What would they mention or notice within the organization that's seen or changed that you were accountable for? And it's a great way to start getting into the empathy of where the organization's at and their idea of what they want. Another technique, kind of similar to the empathy map we showed earlier, was we used empathy maps quite a bit. Mallory likes to think this one looks a little alien. I think I'm the one who drew this head. But we did a senior management team empathy map. So in addition to the employees of the organization, we also wanted to really have discussions and get out on the table what's flowing through the minds of people who are trying to make the impact in the organization and are driving the performance within the organization, so that we could create both those two-way dialogues, both with the executive team and employees within the organization. We used a lot of empathetic technique, interviews, observational interviews, surveys, research of just going and talking to people, of course. And from that, we've built out a values and culture set of personas. So I'm always surprised that personas are often skipped in organizations with big change initiatives, because so many people in the organization, depending on where they're at, whether they're in corporate or on the road, whether or not there's someone who's newly hired or has been there for years, there's just really significant degrees of difference of how they relate to the organization. And one of the values of personas and goals is to really drive, well, what are we trying to get out of our relationship with these people by driving performance and giving them an improved relationship with the values and purpose? And what are their specific conditions in their worlds that are going to make that successful or not successful for us? So ultimately, all of this work led to a refined and revised set of values for the organization. And one of the major ways that they decided to roll this out was through an event, bringing the entire organization together and sharing the experience of these goals. So another design thinking technique is this idea of using a blueprint. And based on the empathy research we had done with employees, we really crafted a day where people would have not only an experience during the event, but ahead of the event and after the event that would really give them time to embed themselves and understand and participate in the values and purpose of the organization. In that sort of quality vein that Arc'teryx has, they created these beautiful Evolution Summit guides for people. There were these gorgeous books that were designed, partially used by scrap materials from their jackets, and an evolution notebook for people to take notes at the event. And the event was just one aspect of their journey to rolling out this values and this culture and values work. And of course, the digital landscape was the next step after this. So one of the quotes we have from our customer around this is, now that they have this common language around purpose, values, and behaviors, people are able to lean on it to speak objectively to performance. And one way they'll be doing that in the future, and this is the work that they're undergoing now, is through digital channels and digital tools. They're in the middle, for example, of rolling out a Yammer tool, a Yammer capability within the organization, a social tools capability, to help people communicate. Because during the surveys they rolled out to the organization, they found overwhelmingly the feedback was that people needed better communication, both within up and down the organization, but within each other. One of the things that's driven the roadmap for them is actually a roadmap. We created both a culture and values roadmap and a communications roadmap. And the communications roadmap, one of the line items in that roadmap is this rollout of this Yammer network. And to give you a sense of what a roadmap looks like, this is not their roadmap, but I thought I'd just kind of throw one up just to give you a sense of what kind of is usually included in one. If we zoom in to this roadmap here, let's see if I can zoom in. We see these phases that are often wrapped around an organizational outcome. So in this case, in this roadmap, it's to help people find information in the organization. And that's broken up into what we call little experiences. So help them leverage past work, help them find templates or tools for their jobs, help them find experts. Also in the roadmap, if we head down the page just a little bit here, is what is this going to be like in the organization to the employee if we successfully achieve this piece of the roadmap? And we write these in I statements, like I can find past examples of our work. And then we also evaluate, well, how many people does this impact? And what do we think the aptitude for change is going to be? Is this going to be difficult or easy? And these help us organize and prioritize all the different roadmap items, as well as how much it's going to cost and effort, of course. And at the very bottom of this, to tying this to the digital workplace, here's an example of plotting the potential technologies that we're going to support these different initiatives within the organization. So there always is, I think this is a great story that every digital workplace, because it's at an executive level and a business strategy level, starts first with the goals and the purpose and the culture of the organization, and then eventually, but not first, gets to the tools and technology that are going to drive it. So another great example of that is in the story of the Provincial Health Services Authority. I might call them PHSA because it's how I know them. They're one of the multiple health authorities operating in BC here in Canada, in BC. And they operate provincial-wide health services as well as, and they call those agencies. So for example, BC's Cancer Agency, which services all of BC, is under their fold, as well as 13 specialized provincial health services. So things like the cardiac, trauma, prenatal, and stroke services in Canada all fall under them. So it's a really complex organization. It has over 19,000 employees. Many of them are healthcare workers, and it has a very large geographical footprint. If you knew what their intranet looked like, which was perhaps people's core experiences with the digital experiences in their organization, it sort of felt a little bit like Yahoo from the 1990s. It was broken up in these sort of main categories. Mallory's laughing at me. I think they would have said that, so I think that's okay. These core main categories where it was just a jump off or a landing to just a bunch of content that's stored in a heck of a lot of places. And the communications team didn't have a lot of leeway in getting news in front of people or key corporate communications. There was a news channel. It didn't have a rich environment to publish very picturesque news. And certainly it wasn't something that drew people in through just sort of the user experience. The digital landscape, I mentioned they had 19,000 daily users, but they actually had a lot more users from across other health authorities too. So it was a very even more complex organization with nearly over 40,000 users. They had their own intranet, which I just showed you, but there's actually 6 agency intranets. So you have 7 intranets now that were part of the digital landscape. These tools were full of content from all different kinds of walks of life. There were communications content, community content, collaboration content. There were work tools for the individuals doing their jobs. And there were lots of constraints within the organization with changes that are undergoing to the desktop environment and bring your own device and the limitations they had around those. The strategy landscape was they really wanted to support this autonomy within these agencies that they developed, but they also wanted to bring everyone into this single unified digital experience. And it was more of a cultural goal than it was a technical goal. They had a vision to create a we are all PHSA experience by bringing people into the fold. So again, it was not about technology, but about the culture that they wanted to create. I put in here they had a government healthcare budget, which means very little money to do something fairly significant by bringing new digital experiences to these problems. And luckily, they had a willingness to create an iterative solution and that would evolve over time. And I think this is pretty critical. Mallory mentioned it in terms of one of the key tenets of design thinking is that you do have to have a willingness to this. You're not going to cross every T and dot every I. You're not building the car every single time you're building the skateboard or the scooter. And so, the common processes around design thinking look something like this. There's lots of different models, but there's this idea that you build something, you synthesize some research, you build something, you prototype it, you test it, and you get it out. And so that's how we decided to build a new intranet for, and really a new digital workplace for PHSA. We used 8, actually 9, there was one we added late, 1-week design sprints. And those sprints were compiled like this. So on Mondays, we would go to an agency. So this is per agency, and we did this 9 times. We would plan and ideate with the agency. We would prototype something for them. So we'd go home, create something that sounded like we were listening to them and looked like we were listening to them. And then we would use the Wednesdays and Thursdays to test those and see how well they responded to them with individuals. So usability testing or feedback kind of testing. And then on Fridays, we'd synthesize those results and we'd start to engage the content teams on their side. So we had a team of people at our offices that would run these workshops, these prototyping, this usability testing. And then we had the customers, the agency lead, and the content team involved in these also, and a nice schedule, as we have on the screen here, to drive all this. And so a meta picture of this timeline, if you will, is we did this over the course of 14 weeks. I mentioned that we did 9 sprints, but we did have a break. So we had a kickoff. We did our first sprint over the course of 2 weeks to get ourselves comfortable with it. We had a little point of time to reflect on whether or not this process was going to work. And then we ran more sprints over the course of time and eventually prioritized and wrapped up. So we took a 19,000 person organization and their 7 intranets, and over the course of 14 weeks had designed an entirely new environment for them, which included a design, an information architecture, capabilities, and functionality that was going to exist in their intranet. And so to give you a little preview of that, this is what their homepage looks like. So the news at the top there, you may not be able to read it, but right underneath it, it says across PHA. So in our testing, we found that driving news by agency was still really critical. People were going to miss their agency intranets. So we had to have a way for them to segment news and drive the right kind of news to the right people. We also, though, needed the PHSA team, the ones who owned Pod, they called it PHSA On Demand. We needed that team to be able to share news across all of those agencies. We made this easier for users by creating a preferences tool. So people can set their favorites for the information that they want to see. And they can set their favorites at the news. The favorites show up in places such as their policy and procedure pages. They can set the news that they want to see. They can set the events that show up, and also the specific workplace they have. So if we look further on down the page, you'll notice it says My Workplace. One of the things we got through the interview process was that people don't just associate themselves with the agency that they're at, but they also associate themselves with the location that the agency is in. And so we created a My Workplace panel, which allows us to give them really critical or important resources specific to the location that they're in. As we scroll down the page, events, as I mentioned, are also targeted by agency. And then we have this kudos corner here. And what's interesting is through the results of our sprint processes, we found that to meet the goal of creating an all PHSA, if we had divided kudos and recognition up just by agency, we'd be failing to create that single unified culture across the organization. So kudos is one of those pieces that actually is organization-wide. And then we have some information at the bottom there that links them to what else is happening external to the organization. And one of the pages I'll just pull out from the interior pages is we knew through the interviews that policies and procedures were really critical and important, and they were part of the work tools people needed when they were in the middle of patient care. And so this was a really important thing to spend some time on. So through the iterations, we worked on organizing policies and procedures in a way that allowed people to filter and by topic or type, as well as by the agency that the policy and the procedure is related to. And we used, through this idea of a design framework, that same metaphor and the same kind of style of thinking to group up other kinds of information. So here you're looking at the team site directory. So just a little preview of what they built in their short period of growth. And I thought I'd come back to this Gallup engagement hierarchy. They knew, that the ability to get their message out to the organization and drive the mission and purpose of the values of the organization was also going to be boosted by really satisfying those basic needs of employees and helping them get the tools for their jobs. So, a neat full circle around this idea of both design thinking, the digital workplace, and responding to these challenges of what's happening at the world of work.
So with these 3 stories in mind, we hope that what came through for you was that it's pretty clear that the communicator it plays a really significant role in the new digital workplace. And what we're seeing happen inside organizations is a little bit something like this image, where we're seeing less sort of single stakeholder or stakeholder group-led initiatives, less just something from IT or just something from HR or comms. We're seeing actually a more holistic approach to the employee experience, which again lends itself really well to the digital workplace and to how design thinking can support that. So we're sort of seeing, even some new players emerge. Actually, facilities is one, given sort of the changing physical space of the places that we work and how we collaborate. So each of these different roles sort of brings their own perspective to the challenges that need to be addressed, and what the priorities are. And so working together, they all relate, and they help to create this holistic view of employee experience in the digital workplace and help to sort of achieve that hierarchy that Brian spoke about. And so, this emerging consortium really does put communicators in a critical role where you can advocate for putting and keeping people sort of first in the entire process. There's a couple of key quotes here from organizations that we think are really showing leadership in this space, both Gartner and the Digital Workplace Group, that really support this idea of a consortium of multidisciplines across organizations helping to make the digital workplace come to life.
So we're going to share with you in just a moment a series of resources you can use to help move forward in your own path around design thinking. But I thought I'd just pause here and just talk about how we help with this, how we can help with this. There's a lot of different ways to go about this within an organization. So I just thought I'd pause to say what we're seeing in terms of the right kind of working models. The first one is really around helping executive teams wrap their head around this, wrap their head around the fact that the digital workplace and the workplace are starting to become one, and that the real value of driving purpose, autonomy, culture, values within the organization can be boosted by this idea of having a digital workplace mindset. And so we can come in and tell stories about the clients, tell the stories we told today, of course, and also just talk about this changing world of work to your executive team. One other way that often helps organizations is just to try and get a lens or an empathetic view of what's going on in the organization. So this would be coming in and doing some level of research and gathering insights that would allow you to sort of move forward around, well, where are we at and where do we need to go as an organization? If you're interested in moving more tactically around kind of helping define those sets of initiatives that are going to move you forward, often we'll come into the organization and help create that alignment through the use of a roadmap or a series of roadmap exercises. We also help organizations just simply wrap their heads around these tools, this design thinking landscape, and evolving some of the processes and techniques and ways that organizations work through implementing an agile approach, an agile technique.
So where to get started is often a question we get asked for teams that see themselves being able to bring design thinking and agile processes and human-centered processes into their organization. I would say the easiest ways to get started are represented here. And you as communicators have the opportunity to sort of stimulate this thinking by asking constantly, are we solving the right problems? Are we focusing on the symptoms, or should we step back? The other is to play a role in building that consortium inside your organization if that momentum isn't already there. You could say, have we thought about, what's the perspective of facilities? What's the perspective of IT? And say that they're your thinking partner to work through this together. Get those practices going, start doing your research about what design thinking techniques involve, and sort of share broadly around, something low risk that you can take on, something that's high reward, that's really a great story to tell, and use those visual techniques. And you can start to become that advocate for the research, for changing the way that you show up inside the organization. You should care because you can influence the organization and create great outcomes. And if you're interested, we have a summary of a bunch of resources that might be relevant for you at this URL, hbn.ro/comms-resources. And there you can find downloadable resources, roadmaps, toolkits, empathy maps, and things that can help you get started.
Great. Well, that ends our presentation today. We did say that we'd take some questions, so we'll hang out here for just a moment to see if anyone has a question.
We do have one, Brian, that came in that someone asked actually if there's any particular standout design thinking resource that we would recommend. It's funny, we get asked this question a lot, and I think one of the biggest sort of tips that we can really give is just get started. Pick your resources and go from there. Make it your own. Don't necessarily worry about being perfect. But I think the idea is if you're inspired by some of the techniques that we shared today, I would recommend the Google Ventures book, actually, called the Sprint Book. And it's a really great resource for that 5-day sort of really nimble, lean approach to defining a problem and coming up with a proposed approach to solving it.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
That looks like it for the questions. Nothing else has come in.
Yeah.
So we thank you for your time today. Again, if you want to register for our newsletter, we'll send out a note about this being updated into our YouTube channel. And we thank you for your time.
Thanks.